Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for From Idea to Implementation, a Ranked Choice Voting and Voting Systems Symposium. For our fourth session, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, the certification process, will begin shortly. My name is Karen Brinson Bell, and I'm a member of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center consulting team, and I will be your moderator for this session. A few housekeeping matters are needed before we get started. Participants have been muted for this webinar to reduce audio interference since we have a large number of attendees. If you have technical issues, please use the question option to send a message to the organizer so we may assist. We have a handout for session 4, which is available in the Handouts tab of the control panel. To expand or minimize the control panel, click the orange arrow of your webinar taskbar. If you have a question or comment regarding the session, please type that message in the question box. Session 4 will be about 20 to 30 minutes, followed by a brief question and answer period. Questions we are unable to answer during this live session will be answered in a follow-up document, which we will email to attendees and also post with a recording of this session on the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website within a couple of weeks of the symposium. Now let's welcome Chris Hughes, staff attorney with Fair Vote and liaison with the Resource Center, to introduce our panelists.
Thanks, Karen. For those of you not familiar with the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, we provide a compilation of best practices and first-hand experiences from jurisdictions that have used this method of voting, with a focus on election administration, since that's our background. The website, www.rankedchoicevoting.org, and the overall project serve as resources for voters, election administrators, policymakers, candidates, and others. The Resource Center continues to evolve, as does Ranked Choice Voting. Both have gone from idea to implementation, and we hope these resources and sessions help you and others improve our democracy and the conduct of our elections. Jerome Lovato, Election Technology Specialist for the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, will join us shortly to talk about the certification process for voting systems and how this relates to ranked choice voting. We appreciate Jerome joining us at a very busy time for the EAC, as they're currently holding their Board of Advisors meeting and just wrapped up 3 days of meetings last week with the Standards Board and a public forum on election security down in Miami, Florida. Now, a little bit more about Jerome. Jerome earned a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering, and after working in the engineering field for 6 years, he joined the Colorado Secretary of State's office as a voting systems specialist. While at the Secretary of State's office, he was the voting systems lead and risk limiting audit project manager. In 2007, he led the recertification testing campaigns on 3 of the 4 voting systems that were used in Colorado. And in 2015, he was instrumental in the piloting of 4 new voting systems for the coordinated campaign, and assisted in deploying and implementing a new voting system in 56 of 64 counties for the 2016 general election. Jerome dealt with many other voting systems projects in the multi-year development and rollout of risk-limiting audits for Colorado, which ran successfully last year in 2017. In 2017, he joined the U.S. Election Assistance Commission staff and represents the EAC for today's presentation. Welcome, Jerome.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for having me today. As he mentioned, I will be talking about our certification process at the EAC, and also give an update on the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, which is why we were meeting over the past, now I guess day number 4 in Florida with the Standards Board and the Advisory Board as part of the TGDC. So about the EAC certification process, there are 2 things that entail the process when it comes to a voting system being certified. One is the first is if it's a new voting system, and then the second is if it's a modification to a voting system. If it's a new voting system, vendor will submit an application to our office. We'll review the application, and if it meets our requirements, then it'll go on to the next phase, which is then for the vendor and the test lab to come up with the test plan, which we will then review and it usually goes through a cycle or two or several for that process. And then after that, the system is then tested. And that just depends on the length of the testing, depends on the product and any issues that may arise during the testing process. And after it's been tested by the voting system test lab, the final test report and any documentation associated with that is turned over to our office for review. And if all looks well, then we certify the voting system. And I provided the RCV group with websites, so if we can pull up the EAC voting system certification process link. And so you can find all of this information on our website. The details, the stuff I didn't cover, it can all be found on our website. This is just a sample of what we have here. So if, under systems under test, that link will show you what is currently being tested right now. And then we have the certified systems link, which shows everything that is certified and terminated and decertified manufacturers. And so you can find all of this information on our website. It's all a public domain. And then when it comes to voting system modifications, it's very similar to a new system certification, with the key difference being that a modification usually occurs if a jurisdiction has a special specific requirement that isn't covered by the certified system. And so that happens fairly frequently, where a jurisdiction will say, well, our state requirement requires the voting system to do whatever the function is. And so the vendor will submit the application similar to how they do when submitting for a new certification. And the process is identical to a full campaign, but it usually takes less time. But it just depends on how major or minor the modification is. And this can happen, all of this can happen anytime. We don't have time limits when they can be submitted. It's up to the certified manufacturer / vendor. And that's our certification process in a nutshell. It's obviously more complex than what I laid out, but that's just the 35,000 foot view of our certification process. And what guides all of this is the second topic I want to talk about today, which is the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines, also known as VVSG. So if we can pull up the link to the Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. And so this document spells out all of the requirements for voting system certification. And so vendors will design their systems to meet these guidelines. And this defines our certification process. And so what's happening now, which is the reason for our meeting right now in Florida, where I am now, is we are working on revising this document. So the current version is VVSG 1.1, and we're working on updating it to VVSG 2.0. And the difference between the two is with VVSG 1.1, we have all of the requirements listed in this one document. And VVSG 2.0, it's a shift from how we done things before. And so if Karen, if we can pull up the presentation I sent you the other day, the PDF. So this document here that is posted also on our website under the standard board meeting link describes the new process and structure for VVSG 2.0, and it basically, there we go. This is the slide I want to look at. Divides the VVSG into 15 principles and 53 guidelines, and that's the overall structure. And within that are going to be requirements and test assertions. And so right now there's public working groups that are working on the requirements. And so if anybody's interested in any of that type of, any of the phone calls with the public working groups, participating and helping define the requirements, I also sent a link to Karen, which she's pulling up now, which can be found here at collaborate.nist.gov/voting, and the link is there, and I'm sure they'll distribute that to everybody. But here we have several working groups. So if you see at the top, there's the pre-election, election, and post-election. So if we scroll up just a little bit more towards the top of the website, and you have the green, blue, and purple, and orange, or whatever color that is. So these are the different working groups, and these are the groups that are defining the requirements for VVSG 2.0, and the public is welcome to participate in these groups. And so this is a pretty big undertaking, that and the status of this is still we're close to having this approved. The only thing that's kind of a roadblock is the EAC needs at least 3 commissioners to vote on this, and right now we're at 2 commissioners due to Commissioner Masterson, his term ending at the end of December of 2017, and so we are just in a state of limbo when it comes to having the commissioners to vote on VVSG 2.0. And so that's the status of what we're doing at this point, and what we continue to do as far as certification. That's an ongoing effort throughout the year. Personally, I'm working on 2 modifications, and I may be taking on a new system here shortly. And so that's the status of where we're at with the EAC. And I would like to open this up for any questions that the audience may have, so I don't bore you to death with information, but I want to make whatever information I have relevant and meaningful.
Jerome, I want to let everyone know this is Karen Brinson-Bell, and as the moderator, I wanted to let everyone know that the websites that Jerome has referenced and this PDF presentation are available as a handout, as well as Jerome's outline. And I think one question would be, where do you see, or what do you know in terms of ranked choice voting being considered by the working groups and as one of the guidelines?
So ranked choice voting, I've been on, I participate in 2 of the working groups actively. the human factors in cybersecurity, and both of those groups, neither ranked choice voting has not been mentioned, and so I'm not familiar with the level of interest from the voting systems in the, I guess, elections community with ranked choice voting, and ranked choice voting is still relatively new to me. I worked in Colorado for 10 years, and I know that the city of Aspen has it, but not falling under the umbrella of state requirements, I didn't have to work with it. But even in the discussion for requirements, I have not heard of any ranked choice voting discussion, which for those who are interested in it, it would be important to hear your voice in the public working groups.
If you don't mind, I'm going to unmute Chris Hughes and George Gilbert, who's one of our consultants with the Resource Center, and let them give a brief update to what one of the working groups they've participated in have done. Chris or George, can you jump in on that?
I'll be happy to. This is George Gilbert. One of the working groups that is actually a subgroup is the Voting Methods Working Group. And the Voting Methods Working Group has, in fact, spent considerable time on ranked choice voting and in developing standards, and developing the definitions that apply to ranked choice voting. What we started out doing was we identified through all of the ordinances and statutes in place in the United States all of the various tabulation rules that apply in different ranked choice voting scenarios. And then we have charted that so that we have an actual flow chart that lays out from beginning to end of the election exactly how ranked choice voting tabulation should take place. And that is expected to be a part of the VVSG 2.0. So that's the good news. If we can ever get VVSG 2.0 approved by the EAC, we will have some very specific guidelines, and we will be developing mathematical models for each of the variants so that any jurisdiction that wants to can specify the rules by referencing the sections of the VVSG that define those rules. So it should be, it should help a lot in terms of standardizing procedures and ensuring that the system developments are following a clear and precise pattern.
And you can see the page for that working group if you go to testing in the blue links at the top of the NIST Wiki page, and scrolling down to this topic as referenced by and clicking on voting methods models. It's at the very bottom of the page. So there's a few of the documents that George and I have worked on available on that page, though it's not comprehensive. We have an enormous Google Drive with all of the other resources we've worked on. And so that includes the things like the flowchart and that spreadsheet that George has mentioned. And we've also done work on other voting methods, things like straight party voting, collecting plurality voting method laws from across the country, that sort of work. But a lot of our work has been ranked choice voting just because it's a more technical and honestly a more clearly defined election method in law than plurality, which I have to think is poorly defined in law, partly just because it was always the standard thing you did. You didn't have to think about what was written into law to run your elections.
George and Chris, we'll let you hang on the line in case something else comes up pertaining to that working group. But we have a question for Jerome that's come in. In light of the current focus on hacking, and that's in air quotes, of elections or swaying the political outcomes of elections, what extra precautions are being taken to certify systems to help ensure intrusions are not being built into any new system?
Well, I think it kind of one of the things that's frustrating to me is how the term voting system is so loosely used in the media, especially since in general voting systems are defined as the systems that tabulate, design ballots and tabulate the ballots, and when the media especially uses terms like the voting system is quote unquote hacked, a lot of times they're talking about voter registration databases, and those don't fall under our certification program. Those are defined by states. Some states have built their voter registration databases in-house, and some contract to have that built. And so a lot of times when it's talking about voting systems being hacked, they're referring to the voting system, the voter registration database, which is separate from the voting systems, because as far as I've heard, and we get occasional updates from DHS. The actual voting systems, there's no evidence of those being hacked by any entity. So I just want to make that clear, that when there is a distinction between voting system and voter registration database.
I might add that one of the reasons that there's no evidence of voting systems being hacked is because it's typically they are never connected to the internet. Almost everyone now, to my knowledge, maintains their voting system software, both their ballot definition and their tabulation software, on standalone computers that are not connected to any internet source, so that there's no access to them.
Right.
Jerome, can you talk a bit about auditing and how that provides a stopgap in like the worst case scenario of elections being hacked in this way?
Sure. So one thing that has been in the news a lot lately is the need for voting systems to produce a paper record. And so one measure that for detection of any kind of foul play is auditing. And so also when it comes to paper discussion, there's a lot of talk about risk limiting audits. But I think just even audits in general are getting a lot of attention, which they should. So one of the things I specialize in is risk limiting audits, and I was the project manager for risk limiting audits in Colorado, and developed the procedures and processes for the audit in that state. And that's just an extra layer of an extra measure of confidence, I guess I would say, to the voting community, that if there's any kind of evidence of foul play, that especially with risk limiting audits, there's a very high probability that will be detected and also corrected. But just aside from risk limiting audits, one thing that we encourage jurisdictions to do is to conduct post-election audit, and a lot of jurisdictions do have post-election audits, and there are a handful that don't have any kind of requirement for a post-election audit right now. But that is one other measure that could help in ensuring that the voting system is tabulating as it should, and especially with the paper record, any type of audit that is being conducted, if like in a case of a recount, you can go back to the paper and ensure that the voting system is doing what it should be doing by having the human element of hand counting.
This is George. Let me interrupt a second. I don't know if everybody was getting the sort of reverberation and cutting in and out on the audio that I was during that last comment. Kieran, Chris, were you all getting that, or was it coming through clear?
It was clear for me.
Same for me, but if you want to reiterate something, certainly, in case others were having problems.
Yeah, everything is getting distorted, but that may just be my reception here.
I think it's you, George. We're getting
Okay.
a clear thumbs up from one of our attendees. And
All right, good.
another all good. So we have people who are attentive and giving us the thumbs up. So Jerome, I want to ask you, I know with Commissioner Hicks as the chairman, he's always put a great focus on education. Can you talk about or direct us to where some of the education efforts are focused for the EAC?
Yeah, so every, I guess it's been happening every, I'd say 6-7 weeks. Our research and communication departments have been issuing, putting out different like guidebooks and things on our website, and covering different topics like cybersecurity, and as time continues to go on, you'll see more information about post-election audits. And so I am looking at our website, which I don't do too often.
We can send a link in the follow-up document if you'd want.
Yeah, let's do that, and I'll provide more detailed information about what each link is, just like I did with my outline, Karen. But we do have that information on our website, along with one other thing that I know we're doing is producing videos for jurisdictions, just to help provide a framework for different topics. There's one thing we try to do as an agency is to educate and provide assistance, and we understand that we're also limited because how states conduct elections is just different for every state, and then even within the states, the counties or towns and municipalities, they all vary for each state, and so we just try to provide a general framework and education tools to assist the elections community.
I think that's an excellent summary of sort of the mission of the EAC. And since we are reaching our 30-minute mark, and we'd hope to give the East Coast folks the ability to leave at 5 and hope that they get to do that. I know many East Coast locations are in the midst of elections, and we appreciate all that our election officials do and the service that they give. I think we'll wrap it up and get additional questions sent over to Jerome so that we can put together that Q&A document. Jerome, we certainly appreciate your time today and all the efforts of the EAC, and we appreciate working with you. We do want to thank our attendees for attending session 4 of the RCV Symposium. We will reconvene tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. and with our 5th session, which is entitled Informed RCV Voters from Start to Finish. That'll be at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and the document and recording of this session and other sessions will be posted to the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center website in the next couple of weeks, and that website is www.rankedchoicevoting.org. For Jerome, the rest of the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center team, and myself, I appreciate your time today, and we look forward to gathering back together again tomorrow. Have a great evening, everyone.